So have you heard about this book? Thinking in Animation, Bridging the Gap? I'm sorry, Thinking Animation. We have it for sale over here after the lecture. If you're interested, just come on right up to this table. And meanwhile, we've got this esteemed panel to talk to us about this topic. Jamie Olaf was at Disney years ago. He was here when I first started. I think he started in 1994 as an animator. Angie Jones works at Digital Domain, and these are the two principal authors of the book. Floyd Norman, I've known for a real long time. He was a great story guy here. Renowned story man at Disney. He started even before Bill Matthews. He started in 54? 56, I'm sorry. Okay. I hope you weren't offended by that.
I was willing to start.
Richard Taylor is currently at EA. He's director and producer and designer now of video games. And I think you all know Jerry Beck, animation historian who's been here before. So give them all a healthy round of applause and they'll take it over.
Howdy and welcome to everybody, and thanks for showing up. Really appreciate it. Quick little about each of us, I guess, and I'll start. Been in animation for about 26 years now, I guess. Haven't lost my mind yet. I hope I lose my mind before I lose my sense of humor, actually. But I'm currently at Ken Duncan Studios out in Pasadena, but I've worked in CG for the past, I guess, 6 years. Since I left Disney, I was lucky enough to be trained in Maya at Disney up at Northside at the Secret Lab. But my animation career goes way back to, I was an animation director on the first couple of seasons of Ren and Stimpy. Worked on a lot of feature films here, starting with Hunchback, and I've done storyboarding and that sort of thing for a while. But currently, I'm doing storyboarding on a feature film out with Ken Duncan. So that's what I'm up to right now. How about you, Ange?
Hi, I'm Angie. I've worked in computer animation for about 12 years now. I started out in games, was in games for about 6 years and crossed over into film on Stuart Little. Met Jamie at Rhythm and Hughes and have observed over the years the changes that have been happening between traditional and CG animation and thought this book would be really important. We also wanted to write a book that would be what we hoped to have had when we first started out. So I am so excited that we have these three people here. I just want to say that Richard and Floyd wrote the foreword for our book, and Jerry was a huge help with a lot of the history. We have a timeline at the bottom of the book as well that covers every event in CG and 2D since the beginning. So I'm going to pass it over to Floyd now.
Hi, I'm Floyd Norman. I'm the ancient guy here. I'm so old I work with Walt Disney. Wanted to be an animator, but ended up as a story artist instead. Went up to Pixar when they were still small to work on Toy Story 2, Monsters Incorporated. And I'm just basically a gag man, story artist, and seen it from both sides. I like traditional, I like digital, and I'll do whatever they pay me to do.
Well, I'm the second oldest quasi animator here. I'm Richard Taylor. I have been in the business. I started at Robert Abel and Associates. I worked here at Disney directing the effects on Tron. I've been a commercial director for 30 years, and presently, ironically, I've evolved into games, and I'm the cinematics director at Electronic Arts here in Los Angeles.
And I'm Jerry Beck, and I'm just a fan. I'm a big fan of everybody in this room, I guess. And I've written a couple of books on animation, mostly Looney Tunes related, and 50 Greatest Cartoons. I helped distribute Japanese anime 15 years ago before everybody else. We released Akira and a few other things. And I co-write the Cartoon Brew blog, and been an executive. I've done everything except animate, which is what you do. So everything in animation except animate. That's it.
What we're going to do is we've got some Q&A for these guys. we figured that was kind of a lot of the format of our book, as we interviewed as many people as we could get to talk to us about their feelings about transitioning from 2D to 3D. Some of the people hadn't made the transition, how they felt about that. Directors, animators, storyboard artists, just anybody we could talk to. And that was probably the greatest thing. We learned the most from talking to different people and hearing about their experiences. So we'll just start at how do you think the audience changed in animation over the years? Floyd, we'll start with you.
The audience changed? Well, I guess there has been a change with the audience, because I remember back in the 60s, I was working on a little show called Sesame Street. And I remember we began to do things a lot faster because we realized that the kids, this new generation, at least at that time, they were very media savvy. I mean, that is, you could just throw stuff at them and they would get it right away. So we began to cut our animation faster. We just began to do everything. If you recall Sesame Street back in those days, how at the time it was kind of like a groundbreaking show, because mainly there was just so much information being thrown. So I think audiences are just a lot more media savvy today. They just pick up stuff so much faster. And that's the biggest change I've noticed.
Well, I'd say that, looking back at the early Disney material that we all kind of grew up on and comparing it to what's going on now, I mean, the massive amount of media that we're barraged by daily, the variety of animation from 3D CG to mocap and all of the varieties of anime and the stylizations that are out there right now, that, we're just inundated with all kinds of stylizations. And as Floyd said, the audience out there now has a nervous system like a hummingbird. I mean, they just absorb stuff like that really quickly. So I just think the complexity, and of course, when it all evolved to 3D, which John Lasseter and people like that who championed that, that created a whole other level of reality that wasn't there before.
The question is, how has the audience changed for animation? Yeah, because it's interesting, because we'll absolutely have different ideas and thoughts and where we come from. Animation was a novelty, way back when Mickey Mouse was invented, and was really aimed at, as we all know, is aimed at adult audiences and all audiences. When people saw cartoons in movie theaters, it became a kids' medium when television came in, and it was basically perceived as junk and children's fare, and that's that. And obviously, in making little gains in the 70s with Ralph Bakshi, and but in the 90s, things exploded, obviously, with Roger Rabbit, and, Little Mermaid, and Beauty and the Beast. Films were being made now for all ages again, and animation now for television was going with MTV and Comedy Central, and now Adult Swim. There's animation made a slightly older audience, and Hollywood has taken it seriously because of the money that's involved with when they release these films. And so now we live in a brave new world with computer animation and iPods and whatever, and animation is now immersed in our life. Thank goodness. I love that. It was this trickle when I grew up, in the 60s and 70s. It was just this novelty. It was an offshoot of comic books, which were considered junk. And now Hollywood has taken it seriously, the mass media. All us kids of the 70s and 80s have grown up with animation from Sesame Street and whatever, and it's part of our vocabulary. So we love it. The general public loves it, and now let's move on and make some really, really great films.
I have a good question. Oh, sorry. I have a good question, actually, for Richard. For me, having worked in CG primarily, the term digital artist was almost non-existent as much as 20 years ago. What was it like in the early years of CG animation, and how did you manage the technical and the artistry of it all?
Well, if you go back, slightly before Tron, there were only about 3 or 4 companies in all of the United States that were really doing raster graphics, that is full 3D CG imaging. And animation was not really a big part of that. It was mostly flying objects around, and you know, in Tron, for example, I mean, all the characters are live action. I mean, there are some grid bugs and a few other things that are snuck in there that are actually traditional animation. But it was very crude, and the tools were very crude when we began with CG. And what's amazed me is watching over the years how quickly the hardware and the software has evolved. I mean, I thought it would take 10 more years than it did to get to, say, Jurassic Park. But, you know, I really must say one of the first things that I ever worked on that was tone matte animations, working with John Lasseter on Where the Wild Things Are, which was an early test that he did with Magi Synthavision, which I was creative director at right after Tron. And John understood, you know, having watched, you know, us working with that particular art form, that, you know, if you could turn these characters into three-dimensional things and move around them and have no limit to the camera's point of view and no physical limits to the characters, that you could create a whole other kind of emotion and feeling that wasn't there with 2D. So that was basically taking 2D animation. Well, what we did is we did a 3D environment and moved these objects through there that were then over-animated for the characters, and then the characters were tone matte, you know, shaded. But it still wasn't a 3D CG character that was animated by, you know, in Maya and Max and all the tools we have now. I've just been amazed at how quickly the software and hardware has evolved over the years. I mean, the complexity of it now is just, you know, unbelievable.
This is for all three of you. Without having drawings as a craft threshold, do you see a set of animation heroes in CG with signature styles like, say, a Ward Kimball or a Freddie Moore or a Milt Kahl? I mean, drawings have always been so important to us, and it was such a big part of our, I guess people actually developed a style, and there's people out there can actually look at a scene and say, hey, that's so-and-so did that scene.
Yeah, without the craft of drawing.
Now that that's been kind of replaced to a large degree, at least in feature films with CG, do you see the ability for people to develop a signature style in CG?
It's kind of a different world. I remember when I was working up at Pixar on Toy Story 2, I would love to attend the sort of sweatbox sessions to look at the animators' work. This is when the director would look at the scenes that were coming, you know, that were in the pipeline. And thinking back to my sweatbox days here at Disney, and it was a totally new process for me because back doing pencil animation, it took you so long to make a revision. It just took forever. But with CG, an animator could go back to his or her computer and just knock that thing out in no time, and that really blew me away. As a matter of fact, when John made major revisions on Toy Story 2 in January of '99, my first thought was, oh my God, this picture's due to be released in November. And yet they got all that animation done in that incredibly short time. And to me, that's what, you know, amazes me about CG stuff. As far as having a signature style, that's a little tougher because when you start with a blank sheet of paper, you kind of make it your own. And the CG character already exists, you know, in virtual space. So I think the more you know about animation, I think it's going to make you a better animator. But it's not quite the same thing.
I mean, there is a homogenization that's happening as a result of everybody using the same tools. And what I love about this book is, you know, all of us in here probably know how to draw in some way. And, you know, when you draw, I mean, I remember the very first CG animated characters, you know, the walk cycles and things, they were mechanical looking. People, you know, there was no gravity, no weight, no follow through, and all the kind of extreme poses that you get in pencil drawn animation, the Max Fleischer-esque kind of extremes. That stuff wasn't happening with CG characters at all. They looked oiled down when they moved. Everything just had this. And there's still some of that that's going on. I mean, you know, getting into photoreality and where we're going with all that now, can you really look in the eyes of one of those characters and believe there's a mind in there and a heart in there and all of that? And that really boils down to certain animators and their ability to bring that out. And I still believe that everybody who is in 3D CG should have to do 2D initially, or should, if they don't, go back and work at that, because just drawing a few keyframes that have these exaggerated poses and so forth, because when you go in and you're working on a CG character that's totally 3D, you're manipulating every little part, and it's all this kind of techno-mechanical way of animating. And I just think that, you know, finally the tools are getting and the animators are getting much, much better at that. And, you know, Pixar and you people here are all a part of pushing that envelope all the time. And I think what's really cool is the stylizations that are going to be coming out of all this rather than photoreality. You have some thoughts?
So is there right now in computer animation the same kind of animation that we used to look at and we still look at by animators? We can recognize their style. That's your question. Like Ward Kimball, Freddie Moore, Bill Teitla, the Nine Old Men. Any you know that where you can almost if you've read all the books and you study the artwork and you study their styles, you can really point out their animation on the screen. I haven't seen that myself in today's the films that I've seen that have come out. The closest thing right now is a studio style. I think some of the Pixar films are superior for a variety of reasons to some of the other studios that are out there. But I think there's a Blue Sky style. I think there's a certain style that each studio seems to be doing. I also believe strongly that what you're talking about will happen. Absolutely. I know with my own limited experience in some producing I've done where I've had a small studio and we have guys working on cutout animation and we know this guy can really do the good effects and this guy can really do some interesting personality with a cutout character, and we know that we can get certain animators to give us certain things. So obviously that's there, and that's I'm sure that's happening. I think it's going to be even more so as the tools and the designs of these films get even more so. As a historian, I look back at I happen to have this rare, very rare because they're not out there. You can't get them anywhere. But there's Frank Tashlin, after he directed some Looney Tunes and worked, I think, at Disney too for a while. He had a very bold style of drawing, and he had an opportunity to do some puppet animation a la George Pal's Puppetoons back in the 40s. And they're basically lost. I happen to have uncovered one of them. And what's amazing looking at it is they actually, you can tell what they did was he storyboarded it. He might have done layouts of some sort in his style, and they carved the puppets to look like his style. And the shots and the poses are very similar to previous Frank Tashlin cartoons. You can really see his style in this puppet film, his three-dimensional puppet film. And just by seeing that film, that makes me, I'm positive that that's going to happen with CG, you know, and certainly as these films are getting, you know, the styles on the CG animated features are changing with every single one we see, and they're getting more and more interesting, in my opinion. We're moving away from the dolls of Shrek, you know, which to me were just moving puppets, you know. We're now really getting into character animation. I think we're definitely going to see individual character animators' personalities come through in the characters.
You know what? I'm going to direct this to Floyd, but I welcome all three of y'all to answer it. What's the difference in creating storyboards for CG and 2D?
Wow, personally, I didn't find any difference. When I left Disney in, I think, 1997 to move up to Pixar, people would ask me, boy, it must have been a real change, you know, moving from traditional to doing a digital film. But when you work in story, your job is just to tell a good story. I mean, to just put the best story you can up on screen. And for me, anyway, the process was no different. I didn't find any difference at all. You just want to do your job the best way you can. You want to tell the story, you know, develop the characters. Be it CG or traditional, for me, it's exactly the same thing.
I agree pretty much. I don't think there should be any line between 3D and 2D as far as storytelling goes. I mean, in the end, you're just trying, as a director, you know, every shot to me should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you think about how the shots work together and the overall context. It's where can you put the camera and the character to tell the story the best. And, you know, going through boarding, you try a bunch of different things, do little animatics, whatever, but what you're really working for should have nothing to do with whether the character's 2D or 3D, although in 2D animation for years, of course, anything that made big perspective changes was avoided. Now, of course, with 3D, there are no limits to, you know, where the camera can go. And that gives you a lot more palette to work with as far as places you can put the camera, kind of more magical things that you can create. But I really think it's really just, as Floyd said, it's about storytelling and the best way to, tell the story or, frame up each shot to make them work.
Let's see. What do you think 2D animators are bringing when they come over to 3D that maybe wasn't there with strictly 3D people?
I had a chance to see some animation that Ken Duncan had done, and
Is that the mouse animation?
no, this was a prologue for the film The Wile.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things when I was looking at this stuff, it just immediately struck me like, oh yeah, this is a guy who's obviously worked, in traditional, worked on paper, because I don't know, there was something about the posing, the staging, just the whole sensibility in the animation that felt different to me. And so I think what Ken brought to his CG animation was everything he had learned doing traditional stuff, and it showed. It really made a difference.
Yeah, I think that 2D animators, basically their personality rolls through what they're doing more so than straight 3D. Guys who have, know how to make something back animate before it moves, or all those little tricks of body language that you learn from drawing that you don't. I mean, it's so easy to draw something 2D compared to, drawing it 3D, that there are all these little cheats that happen as far as motion that really terrific animators do. The elasticity and the follow through, and if I'm going to run from, over to you, little back animation, all those little tricks like that are there. And I don't think that naturally comes about when you have a 3D character there and you just start working with it. I really think everybody, even working in 3D, should do some, basic poses or keyframes that are hand drawn, and then kind of get your 3D character to get there, So I think the 2D guys, there's a real difference. You can see more personality, and more kind of extremes in the poses and things like that.
Well, these guys, I'm always last, and they always say all the best stuff. So, but obviously, no matter how you slice it, the kind of films that are coming out of this studio, in the past, and I feel today, they're really what we'd call cartoons. They're cartoons. They're drawings that are coming to life. The other side of CG is you can do realistic effects or realism, which is being used by Hollywood in many, many movies. But the kind of things done here, no matter how real you make them, they're really cartoons. And so a traditional cartoonist, who's working in CG is bringing the whole wealth of cartooning skills that the 3D technician or the technical guy isn't doing. And I think when the first CG films happened, I'm going to pick on DreamWorks, but things like Ants and things like that, they were just so, you can just tell it was technicians that were making these films. There's no cartoony spirit, I call it, in those pictures. And now, luckily for us, the cartoonier ones seem to be winning out at the box office. So, and I think that's, look at the difference between, not to put anything down from anybody who might have worked on anything in the room, but, The Wild you mentioned. Look at an image from The Wild versus look at an image from any of the movies that came out this year, like Open Season or Madagascar. And, obviously people prefer in this kind of a movie that cartoon feel, that cartooniness, and versus some photorealistic lion with a photorealistic koala. The whole thing is so strange. So
and that was one of the reasons we decided to write the book. My experiences, my painful experiences transitioning from 2D to 3D. Jason, you were there for that. Yeah, it was painful. Sorry, I apologize. But a couple of people we talked to, we asked them, what did you think of it when you were going through it? And somebody said, well, it felt like I was, I was wearing those big heavy rubber gloves and I had my hand in a box like I was working with toxic waste or something. And somebody else said I felt like, I was animating with a microwave oven or something like that. And you know, it's a really tough thing to get your mind around. But and we were starting to, or Angie was really starting to see the effect of some of the 2D guys coming in and struggling with it, but all of a sudden their animation was just so superior, and there was a threat to the pure 3D guys that all of a sudden they thought, oh, am I going to have to go back and relearn my craft? Am I going to have to learn how to draw? Maybe they'd never drawn before. And we were trying to help people along and with the process, you know, as much as we could. And that's really why the book came about.
Yeah, my experience on Stuart Little, I'd say there were about 50 animators, and I think I was the only person that ever really used a computer. Most of them had come over from Disney, had been laid off, and it was interesting to watch them try and animate and didn't even want to use a graph editor. And I'd just show them, I'd come over and move a key, and they'd be like, don't touch it, don't touch it. And I'd move it, and the arm go, and they go, oh, you know, and so we really wanted to try and create a book that will bridge that gap a bit. I want to ask a fun question. Oh, you want to say something?
I just want to say one last thing. I mean, I'm on the board of several art schools and Academy Art College of San Francisco and Otis, and watching the students now go through this process, you know, I can tell you that the ones who go to really good art schools and learn to draw and do all that become better animators by far than the ones who are just kind of glued into wanting to do 3D CG. And you watch them in the Maya and Max classes, and what you see are, you know, on their reels when they go to apply are just these assignments. And there's nothing with any personality. And then the ones who really know how to draw and, you know, have that kind of 2D understanding, their stuff has personality. You know, you can see the person in it, and that's what everybody out in the world is looking for, is to get the most out of any person that they're, you know, the most you can be, rather than, you know, a bunch of student assignments. So I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah, that completely leads into the next question I wanted to ask. Is we asked a lot of people who their favorite cartoon character was, and this really reveals a lot about who you are as a person and what you're attracted to and what you find empathy with. One of my favorite quotes was Darren McGowan. He's a story artist, also directed Hi Hi Puffy Ami Umi. Am I saying it right? And he said he loves Charlie Brown because everyone hates him and he knows it. And that's so Darren. So, Floyd, who's your favorite cartoon character?
Yeah, I recall that question, and it really baffled me because I couldn't think of one. And I guess the one guy that comes to mind, it's not even a Disney character, it's Bugs Bunny. Because I think I grew up on so much of those Looney Tunes, and I just loved Bugs' personality. He was just such a, it's kind of like Bill Murray, you know? Very dry, you know, but very cool. You know, he really had it together. So, yeah, Bugs Bunny, favorite of mine.
That's a tough question. I mean, it isn't Steamboat Willie, but Daffy the Duck was pretty good, you know. He's pretty loose. Yeah, I liked the Max Fleischer characters a lot.
I was going to say Bugs Bunny, but yeah. Next time, start with me, so I can be the one. Yeah, I guess I feel like saying some other character now, just to be different and give some insight of some sort to my personality. But yeah, I think people. I mean, I once worked at. I bet everybody had this experience here because I worked at Disney for like a few months back in the '90s, and we had orientation, and then they ask you in the orientation, "What's your favorite character?" And 9 out of 10 people answer some Bugs. They ask you who's your favorite Disney character, and no matter what, they'll answer Looney Tunes characters. Yeah. You know, they don't get. And that tells you already who, you know. And I remembered when they asked me, I remembered saying at that time, Aladdin, the genie in Aladdin was my favorite character. That's what I remembered saying that because it was the funniest and craziest. And I would have said Bugs Bunny if they had said if they opened it up. I've been documented in print somewhere as saying I like the character of Bosco from the old Looney Tunes with that old character because it's if you really look at those cartoons, they were made during the Depression, and those cartoons are just so optimistic and happy-go-lucky and funny and in their way. They're not anything special, but I just like the optimism of those 1930s Depression-era cartoons. So
I'm going to start with you this time.
Oh, watch. It'll be really hard. It'll be like algebra or something.
creating any ideas on creating a memorable character?
Creating a memorable character. It's obviously a hard thing to do, or else we'd all be doing it and be rich or something. There's a famous quote of Seamus Culhane when he was working for the Paramount studio in the 60s. This is the end of theatrical animation, and he was doing mostly actually I like these cartoons, but they were pretty crappy cartoons at the time, and he was doing like rip-offs of Mr. Magoo. Mr. Magoo as a medieval knight, a character named Sir Blur. There's a character, but nobody here knows that it even existed, but they made many Sir Blur cartoons in the 60s. Anyway, and the Paramount salesman asked him, why can't you give us something good like Bugs Bunny? You know, and like he's basically the pinnacle of that kind of character that people can identify with. And that's really the answer right there, is that whatever character you create, I bet everybody knows this anyway, that you have to have something that the audience can identify with, that people can identify with. I bet Floyd knows this much better than I, but that's the main trait. Most cartoons that don't work, I'm thinking TV animation mainly in my mind right now, but are like such an off-putting. Why would anybody want to, side with this off-putting character, this kind of thing? It either has to be something that you can relate to, or somebody just like that.
So somebody like Daffy Duck, it would be his. Most people are inherently greedy, or just want to be accepted.
Chuck Jones
or
said something like Bugs Bunny's the character he wants to be, and Daffy Duck is who he is. That kind of thing.
Right.
And but that's the thing. It's either somebody you want to be, or somebody that you are, or somebody that you know. It's like when I think of Ren and Stimpy. I don't really relate to either, but like I know people like those people. So it's funny to watch them. So I think you need something that person watching can relate to. That's clearly one of the answers.
Oh, okay. Good question. I think when I took a break from animation and I went over to Disney Publishing, the big thing I noticed was every year I got a chance to write dozens of stories. If you're working on a feature, you're working on one story for maybe 3 years. And when I was writing, I had a chance to write dozens of stories. And I think that's when you really learn how to write, because you get better at story, the more you do it. But in terms of character, I've found it is crucial to create a character that lives. Because if you are successful doing that, then that character will almost write him or herself. You basically almost watch them and see what they do, listen and hear what they say. And that's what makes a script come alive for me, be it a print story or an animated film. If the character lives, he or she's gonna live on screen. Make them real.
So when you're doing that creating, are you drawing from past experience of observing people around you, that sort of thing?
Oh yeah. I think a lot of characters, you bring them from life. The people you really like, and maybe some you don't like so much. You find them useful in your story. But I think audiences get it, because if a character is real, the audience knows right away. They can see it, they can feel it, they can hear it. That character's real.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about being an animator. I think everybody here would agree is our powers of observation are, probably in some ways more highly developed than most people, probably to the irritation of a lot of people around us. But it's one of the great things is just observing people on the street. I mean, I know a lot of people carry sketchbooks around and fill them up, and just observing little quirks in people that you can find and stick into the characters when you're developing them. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Whether it's in the capacity of an artist, a producer, whatever, going back in time, is there a particular film? I'm going to start with you, Jerry. A particular film that you would have liked to have worked on, and why?
Wow, that's a big question. That's a great question. I haven't ever really thought about it. Wow. Yeah, he probably worked on all the films I'd like to work on. But I would. I mean, there's so many periods that are very interesting in the history of animation. I mean, I'd even want to work at some of the studios working on TV commercials back in the 50s. That would be kind of a cool thing to do. But I mean, my mind just goes to my favorite animated film. It's a lot favorite of a lot of people's. It's a Disney film, and it's Dumbo. You know, what a great film. And obviously, Walt apparently was not around, and the story goes, you know, he was down in Latin America, and so they had a little more freedom to do the film the way they wanted to. And it just, that film has everything in it. You know, it has heart and has fantasy, and it's just a great story. And it's you know, it's just very creative and visual, and so it just seems like that's the golden age right there, encapsulated in that one film. And that would be a wonderful place to go back in time and just observe. I just want to be on the wall. I want to be on the storyboard.
Well,
Tucked up
Direct to
and
Video
watch
is doing a CG version of it apparently. So if you want to go and work on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right, you've just ruined my dream somehow, and my lunch. I'm sorry.
You mean Dumbo? You mean?
I heard that. I mean, I was
CG?
horrified. I think it might have gotten shelved or something. I'm not sure. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. I apologize.
Sorry, yes. No, well, no, it's true about it's really great if you're left alone to make a movie. I mean, I think that's a big problem with filmmaking today is, well, animated feature films represent so much money, and you know that executives are going to be worried about, you know, that investment. It's a huge investment. But if you're left alone, it is so cool to be left alone. Even when we were doing Jungle Book, Walt Disney was away most of the time. You know, I don't know if people know that. You know, he was a very hands-on manager, but he just wasn't around that much. So we were left to play for months on time, you know, months on end, to just play around and do stuff. Now, of course, eventually Walt would come back and want to look at the stuff, and he better like what he sees. Although there were some cases where he didn't like what he saw, but that's another story. But the cool part was just being left alone to do your thing. And I've often told people that in my entire career, I think the easiest film I ever worked on was The Jungle Book. And yet that was a film I had to answer to the toughest guy, you know, Walt himself. But I think because he left us alone, you know, we made a movie that people seem to like.
I think Ward Kimball said the same thing when I asked him about what his favorite time at the studio was out of all those years. And he said, you know, without any hesitation, he said the 50s. And I said, why was that? And he goes, well, he was making the Man in Space series. And he said, Walt wasn't around, you know? So
I'd have to say maybe Pinocchio, Dumbo, sure. It would have been fun to have been around when they were doing, Fantasia, for example. You know, where there was a whole other kind of idea, that was more synesthetic kind of thing rather than it being, but, you know, just the gags that they were working on with the dancing hippos and all the other stuff in that film. There was some, you know, that was quite a departure from the traditional kind of Disney stuff. So it would have been fun to have been around any of those, really.
keeping on the same vein, what were your who were your major influences when you were starting in the business or just getting into the business? Who would you consider the people who had the most influence over your career? Jerry, sure. Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, actually, I wanted to be an animator, and I went to School of Visual Arts when I got out of high school, and that was my dream, is actually to do what you guys are doing. And it was the mid-'70s, and it was the absolute worst. And anyone who knows that period, it was, and I was in New York, so it was nothing. It was like a barren desert of what was happening in animation.
Wasn't Scooby-Doo out? I mean, come on.
I rest my case.
He-Man and the Masters of the Universe came later.
That was
right?
10 years later. That was like a renaissance. No, but I, well, thank God for He-Man. No, but, and actually at the time in the 70s, the rumor, and when Richard Williams started out doing the Raggedy Ann and Andy in New York, amazingly, around 76, and that was like suddenly everybody wanted to work on that because that was real animation was coming to New York for some reason. But anyway, so as a kid, I love Bob Clampett and Chuck Jones and animators like that. You know, I think I like them because you could feel their hand. It's almost like what we were saying about the characters. You could feel the hand of the animator. You know, a Chuck Jones cartoon looked like that. A Bob Clement. And you knew that you, in theory, could do something like that. Maybe you can draw your own way, and maybe you can make an animated version of that. And that was very inspirational to me. And that was definitely my dream. So that's my answer right now.
Let's see, when I came to Disney in the 50s, I had already been quite a student of Disney films. You know, it was tougher to find information back in those days because there just wasn't that much about animation anywhere. You know, you'd have to just prowl through the library trying to dig up stuff. But even back then, I began to recognize certain styles, certain directors like Bill Justice and Ward Kimball and Geronimi and all of these guys. And so you got to know their work, you know. And I think that's what was, I think that's what really inspired me, you know, because I got to know that these were real people. And when I first came to Disney and I saw these names in the hallway and, you know, on the directory, and I recognized the names, I said, oh my God, that's so-and-so and that's so-and-so. You know, I've seen his work and I've seen his animation. So I think that was the real inspiration for this young kid coming to Disney in the 50s and hoping that someday I could be like one of these big shots, you know, making all of these great cartoons.
Winsor McKay was kind of cool, I thought. Gertie the Dinosaur and Little Nemo stuff, the dream stuff that his cartoons were, I thought were influential. But I started making 16 millimeter films, and I was influenced. I mean, obviously people like David Lean and Kubrick and people like that, more about live action, but just their attention to detail and the you know, the scope of their films and the heart that was in them. You know, I think you know, but I got to know Con Pedersen really well. Worked with him for years, who was a real hero of mine, and Ward Kimball, and I got to work with his son on a bunch of early 7-Up stuff. So you know, a little bit of everybody in there.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll open it up to everyone. If Jungle Book was the easiest, what was the hardest, Floyd? What was the most difficult?
Oh, that's not fair. The hardest film. Wow. Well, you know, I think they were all hard after that. You mean in terms of story or just
Yeah,
getting the
not-
picture done?
Yeah. More just, maybe what's the hardest thing you ever storyboarded?
The hardest thing
And why?
and why. Oh boy, you finally stumped me. You finally stumped me. I don't know. Every film, when I came back to Disney in the 90s, I had been away for 10 years doing books and stuff. And I came back to work on The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And you know what? I think I came back to work on that film because I knew it was going to be very, very difficult. And I was looking for something difficult to work on. So I said, I came to Gary Trousdale, who was one of the film's directors, and I said, Gary, I understand you're doing The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think that's the dumbest, craziest idea I ever heard of, but I want to work on it. So because I knew it would be tough, and I think I was looking for a challenge. So I think Hunchback would be one of, I think it would certainly fit as something really difficult trying to bring that to animation.
The worst experience I ever had was working on Star Trek, the first feature. I was at Robert Abels, and we were brought on to do the effects, and it was a film that had, until Robert Wise came on, it was a film being done by committee, which is the worst. You can't do film by democracy. You need somebody, you know, at the rudder, and it was just, you know, kind of a debacle, and storyboarding over and over and over again. As they would keep changing the script. I mean, the Enterprise is one of the most ridiculous things ever created in the history of outer space. But to draw it from all these angles, time and time again, I mean, it's insane. So that was my worst experience, actually.
I don't have any experiences that everything I've ever done in animation I've loved because I love animation. So. But.
One more question. If you were starting in animation today, what do you think the advantages or any disadvantages to beginning and getting into the craft of animation today?
Starting today, I think when I started, animation was such an odd job, you know, because there just weren't that many people who wanted to do it, and so I entered a less crowded field. I think today the disadvantage might be there's so much competition. There's so many guys who are looking for a job that you might want, and so in that sense, it's tougher to begin your career today. But also on the other side is there are more opportunities today, more studios, more projects, more stuff going on. So that's the upside. But back when I started in the business, a lot of people just didn't even think of animation as being a viable job. Like, how can you make a living doing that?
My parents still ask me that a lot. When are you going to get a real job?
Yeah, a real job. Never had a real job.
Well, I think, again, seeing kids at school coming out now and trying to, there's a kind of, once everybody started using the same tools, other than pencils, it became, there's a certain kind of sanding down of everything that happens there. And so trying to get people to really create stuff of their own, to go off and make their own little film rather than student projects, to, to be able to show something to anybody that you're applying to work with that's unique. And it doesn't have to be flushed out, totally 3D and shaded and, lit terribly. I mean, if it's just a funny bit that a character does that, there's a walk cycle where he trips over his own feet and gets up and dusts himself off and whatever it is, but something that has personality into it. So what's going to cut through, there's so many people graduating from schools that, they want to get into effects or they want to get into animation, but they really, they don't put the energy into it. They don't put the amount of work. They don't get into that dance with the process, and they don't show you stuff in their portfolio that's what they just had to see, that they had to do. You just see a lot of student work that's just what they were assigned, and that's it. And, as all these effects facilities and gear up and down for picture, you can go in and work on a film, but you'll be working on the tail fire of this thing for, 6 months, and then you're laid off with everybody else. So how do you break through that? It's got to be with your ability to direct and act and make a character have, something unique about it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I remember reading an interview with somebody, one of the principals of Star Wars, and they were talking about that very thing. Kids coming out today as opposed to what they were doing back in the 70s. And he said the big thing back then is a lot of the kids that were coming into it already had a lot of life experience. These guys went out, sailing or surfing or flying hang gliders and stuff back then. These guys already had this massive, outside life, whereas a lot of the kids he sees coming into it nowadays, they have nothing but this media savvy sort of computer background, and that's it. They're not bringing anything else to the table.
Well, that's why what you mentioned about having a notebook or sketchbook, I think everybody in the arts should have one with them at all times and write down little ideas. A little sketch, you go back a couple of months later and see something and you go, oh my God, that was a great idea. But it's about observing the world all the time and coming up with ways to tell a joke. To do comedy, you got to know how to do bad really well. And, how to interpret that stuff through characters means you have to observe a lot and think about it a lot. And you need to, take an acting class or, learn to play a musical instrument or do some things that push your envelope a little bit to get you into doing some things that aren't easy for you.
Should we open it up? You want to do that, Tenny?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Do people just yell out?
Questions, they'll raise their hands, and then if you would repeat the question. There's a hand, can you see it?
Oh, yes.
In the future, what do you think should be in the future of 2D and 3D films?
In the future, what do you think should be in 2D and CG films? Do you mean
Less
content?
fart jokes?
Stop.
Good answer.
A lot less fart jokes?
Do you mean content or story or all of it? Anything? Guys?
I'd like to see some more. I'd like to see some more what I call adult skewing stuff. I mean, I'm not sure what that is. If I knew what it was, I'd write the script myself. But I think we just had a year full of groups of animals on all kinds of adventures, and that's kind of like the mindset. Now, obviously, we know that there's films coming up next year and the year after that. I believe next year there's a whole bunch of bees on adventures, but. So I think they're changing, but I think that's some maturity, some more maturity, some growth. I'm sure that's going to happen. But
it's funny, you kind of see that from some of the Japanese films coming over. You see a kind of a whole different mindset. I mean, the films of Miyazaki are on such a, I find them on such a different level from the cartoons that we do here. I mean, there's room for studios here to do more mature films.
It's just that they're at least Miyazaki's obviously an individual artist who's got such respect that he can do whatever he wants, basically. We've really, I don't want to say we've yet to emerge that kind of person here, but basically it's the studios that are running things. So it's product they're creating. You know, they're creating,
somebody like Brad Bird comes the closest to that, do you think?
Yeah, Brad.
At the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. I think the stylizations that are going to evolve. I mean, everybody's been heading toward photoreality and CG and that stuff for quite a while. So we get there. We're already there, actually. I mean, Superman in that film, a lot of tight close-ups of him doing all kind of was totally, CG and nobody ever knew it. But once we've done photoreality, then it's all these other forms of stylization, and the anime. The way of telling story from the Asian point of view, different ways of telling story instead of being the linear kind of beginning, middle, and end that we've been used to. There will be some changes there probably, but I just think it'll be fascinating to see the kinds of stylizations that are going to evolve. I'm in games now, and that's a fascinating conundrum that we're evolving there because of the new consoles where everything is becoming photoreal and it's all 1080i, it's all high D. All the stuff that games could get away with before on NTSC, you can't do now. So everything is becoming, and can you make characters that are totally interactive, that have personality and belief with new programs like Face Robot and that kind of stuff? There are ways that that games are becoming, I mean, they already are making more money than film. But, I do a lot of the cutscene material, which is the little films that tie it all together, but the actual gameplay now with characters that really have personality, especially in role-playing games.
You're adding a lot of storytelling too, because when I first started in games, it was punch, kick, die, explode.
But games, the big difference is when you go see a film, you're a voyeur. I mean, you sit there and you watch it for 90 minutes, you laugh, you cry, you're into it or you're not, but you don't in any way interact with it. The very nature of a game, whether you're good at them or not, is the very moment you start to do anything with them, you are interacting with it. And as filmmaking and games kind of cross over more and more, and also 3D evolves in more and more, there's going to be, kind of new ways to tell stories that I don't know, any of us know where that really will go, but it's going to change.
But animation's still a business. And to me, that's what concerns me, because whether or not the businessmen will allow creativity to flourish. I think one of the things I always look for in a new project is to be blown away by it. When somebody pitches an idea and you say, wow, I've never seen that before. I've been asked to work on a number of films where I took a look at it and it was a paycheck, but nothing more. I really didn't have any interest in the project. It just didn't move me. And unfortunately, a lot of these films, when they came out, didn't seem to move the audience either. So, I think I think the business guys are going to have to allow creative people to do good stuff.
Okay, you?
You started to talk a little bit about it. For example, in live action films, you have this incredible amount of editing, sophisticated editing and cinematography that happens, and it's still not happening in animation. Or what do you think of that?
Well, when you shoot
she wants.
Oh, I don't know if I can repeat that question.
She said there was a lot of sophisticated editing, and we're not seeing that in animation today.
Well, that's because, when you're shooting a live action film, the first thing you do, I storyboard it out, then we, you work with the actor to, again, to give them a sense of who they are as a character. Every actor wants to know anything you can tell them about their character, the history of them, you know, did they come from a broken home, you know, what did they, you know, anything, because they use that material. And if I can give them a prop, I just shot Billy D. Williams for a game I'm working on, and I gave him a cane to work with, and it broke open all these things, a way of expressing himself, and using that cane just to be a. But you shoot for coverage, so the first thing you do is you shoot a master, and then you get tighter and tighter, and then you do the reverses, and you get coverage, and you throw that, and you do that intentionally so that the editor has a lot of places to go. Well, unfortunately, in making animated films, you don't have a bunch of outtakes. You don't have all that coverage. It would be great if in storyboarding people thought more like that. You know, generally people don't think about half-second cuts and little kind of things that happen that you do editorially. And if you all notice watching television commercials or features or anything, I mean, the speed of editing and the speed change moves and all that kind of stuff that where you're moving and you go there and that kind of stuff, all those kinds of stylizations are evolving in to filmmaking and commercials, and it'll roll over into animated things. But you know, to answer your question, is because you don't have all that coverage to cut with, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to, you know, run those boards by an editor, you know, when you're doing that, and say, you know, how could we soup this up here? How could we make, you know, get some more energy out of this fight sequence or this, you know?
I think that's why a lot of the live action directors that have crossed over into animation, like Zemeckis and George Miller, they like mocap. Because they can get a lot of footage and they can play with cameras, and it changes, it throws a whole boomerang into the whole pipeline that is animation, which is starting with Floyd with very strict storyboards, and you kind of stick with that.
Well, mocap, that's a mocap, I mean, Polar Express, you know, a lot of people didn't like that film because they didn't feel like those personalities, that there was really souls in those people. Maybe a lot of people who saw it didn't realize it was an intentional stylization like the illustrations of the book, which pulled them back. But there's something about, you know, getting, I don't know, I watch a film and sometimes I just believe there's a heart and a soul in that animated character. Other times I just don't buy it at all. I mean, Final Fantasy, the first one that came out with those CG characters, I mean, they were dead.
I think mocap for a lot of people is like really, really expensive rotoscoping, you know?
It generally sands everything down a little bit, and really good mocap, you have to go back and add extremes and stuff because there's a certain kind of oiling down of everything by mocap, and that's why this Face Robot program that has like 20 points that they're using that has just evolved brings in all the tiny little nuances on a face that aren't there, that and it's programmatically done. But it, you know, whereas when Hanks was shot for, you know, Polar Express, he had hundreds of, you know, things on him, and it really didn't help.
I think I was working with an animator at Warner Brothers, and they had just come off the Gollum unit at Lord of the Rings, and somebody had actually gone around and warned the animators that Anthony Serkis, the actor who they had done mocap for Gollum, was going to get the lion's share of the credit. And they said, you know, we know this isn't true. We know that 90% of his stuff had to be gone over and re-keyframed by animators, but we were trying to get him an Oscar nomination. So they sort of crapped on the animators a little bit, but it gives you sort of an idea that you know, this pure machinery is never. I don't want to say never, but I don't think pure machinery is ever going to get you the amount of warmth and heart that a human being can put into a performance.
I think Gollum was the best special effect in the last 20 years. I mean, he's that far away from Elijah Wood face to face, and you don't go, he's CG. You go like, what in the hell is he going to do now? I mean, it's there's a personality in there, and it was phenomenally well done.
I'm just going to read that. What contributed to the decrease in popularity of traditional animation in your book? You know, was it like story? Was it just that the general public got sick of just watching cartoons, or, you know, what do you think?
That's a great question. I was going to start off with that one, but I think huge amount of factors. I would say a lot of meddling by middle managers. There became this sort of as I perceived it back when I started here at Disney, there was a definite level of management that was put between the artists and the people who made the ultimate decisions, and you couldn't even get a good idea through that level of management. I think it was a distrust for the artists, and there was also, I think, there was an effect that I think you were talking about. There was an effect that high-level graphics in live-action films were having on people's perception of what was great to look at. You know?
Yeah, I think visual effects, first of all, pushed the medium itself to the forefront. And the same kid that sees Kangaroo Jack and Men in Black is not going to see Brother Bear, regardless of story, as something valuable, just simply outside of story. Then I think after Lion King, there was a formulaic approach to epic level movie making, and also involving a lot of management and people in story, that they all knew how to write a good story. So storytelling, and I'm sure you'll back me up on that, kind of went through a lot of changes after Lion King. So I think I think all of these things sort of came together and has created a bit of the demise of 2D as a medium itself.
Yeah, you could actually see the difference from Lion King. It seemed everything changed from that point. That tremendous growth we had. From the '80s. I mean, when people thought animation was dead at Disney, and all of a sudden I came back and I saw Great Mouse Detective, which turned out to be a pretty good little film. And then there was, of course, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin, each film, making more and more money. Audiences were paying attention to animation again, but then something happened.
You know what else?
To a degree, there might have been the massive success brought unreal expectations for what, trying to make that much money. How could you top Lion King's money?
Yeah, well, you get that problem of when you're successful, now all of a sudden you've got to be successful again. And nobody can keep that going forever,
I think, too, storytelling itself, connecting to what you were saying with animation, broadening the audience beyond kids, that's what that second golden age had done. And then everybody saw visual effects starting to make a lot of money, a lot more money. And they also had broadened the audience quite a bit. So it was the idea, well, we need to tell more adult stories and a wink at adults rather than at kids throughout the story, and it created some stories that just didn't work.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we'd love to sell some books. Sorry.
Time for a commercial.
Everyone will sign the books as well if you guys want to get them signed. How much are they? $40? Where's Hannah? 43 with tax. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I didn't look at it.